This fall, switch to a TurboTax Live expert and we'll beat the price you paid your pro last tax season.
Smith, Judalon, Smith, Smyth.
All right. Ms. Smith, on March 5th, 1990, did you have a meeting with Detective Leslie Zoller?
Yes.
And do you recall at that time that you provided Detective Zoller with some information which, so far as you know, led to the arrest of Eric and Lyle Menendez?
That's correct.
And was it based on that same information that the Beverly Hills Police Department recovered certain tapes from a safety deposit box from Dr. Oziel's bank, to your knowledge?
Objection calls for complete report.
Sustained.
Did you provide the Beverly Hills Police Department with certain information on March 5th, 1990 concerning some tapes which you knew of at that point?
Yes.
And did you have a lengthy conversation with Detective Zoller on March 5th, 1990?
Yes.
And the following day, that would be March 6th, 1990, did you have a second meeting with Detective Zoller and a deputy district attorney by the name of Elliot L. Haddeth?
I believe so.
And did Mr. L. Haddeth and Mr. Zoller tape record a very lengthy conversation with you?
Yes.
And during the course of that tape recorded conversation, did you tell Detective Zoller and Mr. Al Haddeth the background of your relationship with Dr. Jerome Oziel?
Somewhat.
And did the conversation and what you told them relate to a time period between June of 1989 and March 6, 1990, the time when you were talking to the detective and Mr. El Haddeth?
Yes.
Did you, in fact, first meet Dr. Oziel in June of 1989?
June 28th of 1989.
And could you just very briefly describe the circumstances in which you met Dr. Oziel?
I had some tapes from a seminar which I had listened to, and I was interested in taking some of those seminars. And on the end of the tape, it said to call the Phobia Institute of Beverly Hills and called information. The phone number I received was the phone number for Dr. Oziel. And I left a message, and he called me back and talked me out of the seminars and into the idea that I needed one-on-one therapy.
And do you remember roughly when that first meeting was?
The first physical meeting or the first phone call?
The first phone call.
In the first week of June of '89.
And when was your first meeting with him?
The first physical time we met was June 28th of '89.
And could I approach a witness, Your Honor?
Yeah.
Show you what has been marked previously, exhibit number 120, directing your attention to the first page of that exhibit, which is a letter dated June 15th, 1989, beginning, "Hi, Jerry, thank you for your time and consideration. Encloses my poetry book as a token with a Sound and Light business card." Do you see that?
Yes.
Is that your business card?
Yes.
And is that a letter that you wrote to Dr. Oziel as a result of your first contact with him?
Yes.
And after that first contact with him, was your initial relationship with him a business relationship?
No, not at all.
What was the extent or nature of the relationship that you had with him in the very beginning?
It would flip-flop between therapy and his idea that he was my ideal person.
Ideal person romantically?
Romantically.
All right. And you said, I think, that in one of your first conversations or the first conversation, he suggested to you that you needed therapy?
Yes.
What specifically did he say in that regard?
When I said that I wanted to take seminars, and he asked me the reason why, and I said because I had decided I wanted to have a relationship. I'd like to be married and have children. Then he said, well, based on what I was saying, that I had an intimacy problem, and he felt that I needed one-on-one therapy rather than to go to seminars.
Did he suggest to you that he was available to provide that one-on-one therapy?
Yes, he did.
Did he indicate to you what his fees were?
Yes, he did.
And what did he say in that regard?
He said that his fees were like 160 upwards for 45 minutes.
And did you indicate that you would like to hire him as your therapist?
No, I said that that wasn't in my budget, that I was thinking of doing a seminar, and I was thinking, a couple $100 a month. So,
And did he indicate that he was still going to provide therapy services to you?
at that time, what he indicated was that he was going to refer me to someone in the price range that I would be comfortable with.
And did that in fact happen?
Yes.
And did you get referred somehow back to Dr. Oziel?
The phone numbers that he gave me, no one ever answered the phone, or in one case, I left messages, but no one ever returned my calls. So I never connected with any of the numbers he gave me.
And did you end up in therapy with Dr. Oziel?
Yes.
And when did that patient-therapist relationship begin?
About the beginning of July. It's hard to say. It actually really began in June because of all the phone calls in preparation for referring me to someone else were all therapy.
Therapy in the sense that he was exploring your feelings on the telephone with you?
And eliciting from me just all of my background information, family information. So technically, I guess it would be that it started in June of '89.
And how long did it continue?
Up to the day that I escaped.
Which was what date?
June, it was Sunday, March, I think 4th.
When you,
89.
when you say escaped, are you referring to leaving Dr. Oziel's house?
Yes,
Because for a certain period of time you lived in Dr. Oziel's house?
yes.
And when did you first begin to live in his house and when did you leave?
He took me there in mid-December, mid to late December, around the 19th. The exact date, I'm not positive of the exact date, but mid to late December of '89 until I think it was March 4th of '90.
Now, the therapy that you were receiving from him, was that therapy where you would go into his office and have a session with him in the office and then pay him some money?
No.
What kind of therapy was it?
Sometimes I did go to the office, but most of the time he came to my house.
And how would the therapy, just in general, without getting into the details, how would it happen that he would be coming to your house providing therapy?
Because it wasn't officially like I was a patient, and he would always maneuver it so that he would say, well, I'll just drop by, or it would be the timing. It was always something to do with the timing. And so it just ended up that my house was only 5 minutes away from his office.
And were there times during the period of time when he was giving you therapy where he would provide letters to you indicating the nature of your problem, your psychological problem?
He did write me a diagnosis letter.
All right. Can I again approach your witness, Sean?
Yes.
Ms. Smith, showing you exhibit number 112. Would you take a minute and read that? That's a letter dated September 3rd, 1989, to whom it may concern. And it says, Judalon Smith was incapacitated by a chronic stress-induced panic disorder, as reported to me by her by way of telephone. That's signed Dr. Jerome Oziel, Director, Beverly Psychiatric and Psychological Center. And it also talks about an extensive phone consultation that Dr. Oziel did with you. Are you familiar with that letter?
These are the words, but it was on his letterhead. This is not his letterhead.
And that's signed by, were there actually two letters that he provided to you indicating a diagnosis?
Yes.
And showing you exhibit number what I've had marked as 327, which is on a Beverly Psychiatric and Psychological Center stationery. It's dated August 30th, 1989. It says, to whom it may concern, Judalon Smith was directed not to attempt ambulation or travel 8/30/89 on medical advice due to numbness and something I can't read, affecting motor capacity to the extent that any such attempt at movement, ambulation, or operation of a vehicle would have been impossible or dangerous. And it's signed Dennis J. Munjak, M-U-N-J-A-C-K-M-D, who's identified as the director of the Beverly Psychiatric and Psychological Center. Do you see that letter?
Yes.
Are you familiar with Dr. Oziel's handwriting?
Yes.
And is that letter, which is purportedly signed by Dr. Munjak, actually authored by Dr. Oziel?
Yes.
And do you know the circumstances under which that letter was written? Was that provided to you?
He provided it to me.
For what reason?
One of my favorite supplements is Cunol turmeric. Turmeric helps with healthy joints and inflammation support, and Cunol has the #1 doctor recommended form of turmeric. Cunol, the brand I trust.
Because I had a landlord-tenant small claims case, and I had a stress-related problem where I would wake up sometimes and not be able to move on one side of my body. And the morning of that court hearing, that's what happened. And so he told me that just to call the court and tell them, and that he would write the letter because he was the one who had diagnosed it. I'd had the stress disorder for some time, but it had not been diagnosed by my medical doctor.
And did you ever see Dr. Munjak before that letter was written?
I've never seen Dr. Munjak.
And did Dr. Oziel provide you that letter purportedly written by Dr. Munjak?
Yes.
And did you use that in your court case?
No, when I noticed the signature, I refused to take it to the court because it's a lie. I'm not a patient of Dr. Munjak's.
And did you then obtain from Dr. Oziel a second letter, which is the letter that's in front of you, signed by Dr. Oziel, relating to the same conditions?
Yes.
And you're quite sure that the handwriting on both those letters is Dr. Oziel's?
Absolutely.
Is there any doubt in your mind about that?
No.
Now, one of the letters is written on the Beverly Psychiatric and Psychological Center stationery, correct?
Yes.
And as far as Dr. Oziel represented to you, was he the director of that center?
Yes.
Did Dr. Oziel also represent to you that in addition to being the director of that center, that he had other businesses going at the same time?
Yes, he did.
Did he in fact present to you various business cards indicating that he was engaged in several businesses?
Yes.
And I'm showing you it's been marked as exhibit number 330. You recognize that piece of paper as containing a sampling of Dr. Oziel's business cards?
Yes.
Did he provide these cards to you during the course of your therapy with him?
Yes, he did.
And is one of the cards Beverly Psychiatric and Psychological Center, Dr. Jerome Oziel?
Yes.
And is another card the 50/50 Financial Systems, J. L. Jerome Oziel, President and Chief Executive Officer?
Yes.
Is a third card Funes, F-U-N-E-S, in Oziel, Furniture and Gift World,
Yes.
2045 Westlake Avenue, Seattle, Washington?
Yes.
And is another business card that was provided to you by Dr. Oziel during your therapy, something called Automax, A-U-T-O-M-A-X, J. Jerome Oziel, Chairman of the Board, President and Chief Executive Officer?
Yes.
Right. Did he provide all those cards to you during the course of your therapy with him?
Yes, he did.
And in addition to providing those cards to you, did he, from time to time, call you up and propose various business schemes?
Yes.
And did you, during the course of your relationship with him, in fact, tape record telephone conversations in which he would call you up and propose these schemes to you?
From my answering machine, there are tape recorded calls.
And when would you start tape recording calls from him? Just time-wise. Can you give us a time frame of when you started doing that?
I started keeping the tapes from my answering machine in September of '89.
Why were you recording the phone calls from him?
I wasn't recording the phone calls.
How did they end up being recorded on your answering machine?
I had this answering machine that had its own mind, and it just would record and stop recording at its own will. And also, I also left the recorder on all the time because I didn't have phones in every room. I just had a phone in my bedroom. And if I was in the front part of the house, I wouldn't hear the phone, or I would, and then I'd pick up. The only extension I had was in the kitchen. And so if we started talking before the outgoing message was finished, then the answering machine just assumed that we were leaving a message. We didn't know we were having a conversation.
And so that's how you came to record conversations.
So that's how I came by the tape recordings.
And after you had a meeting with Detective Zoller and Mr. Alhada, was there another period of time where you were recording conversations with Dr. Oziel at the specific request of the Beverly Hills Police Department?
Yes.
And in fact, on one occasion, did the Beverly Hills Police Department provide you with what's called a body wire for you to wear to a meeting with Dr. Oziel?
That's correct.
That was in March of 1990.
Correct.
And showing you what I've had marked as exhibit number 329. Is that a cassette of a tape recorded telephone message which took place in September of 1989?
Yes, it is.
And that was why you were a patient with Dr. Oziel?
Yes.
I want to play this recording for you and then ask you a question about it. And after listening to that tape, what's being referred to there? He indicated you had 1 week to get it together, and you said that tape was made in September of '89. What is he talking about there?
Objection calls for circulation.
Sustained.
First of all, is that Dr. Oziel's voice on the tape?
Yes.
And did you understand what he was referring to? Specifically, was a reference made to a business proposition that you were aware of at that time when that telephone call was made?
When he left the message, I may not have been, because he came up with new ideas every day, every week.
All right, and playing you what I've had marked as 328, which is a cassette tape. Is that a tape that was made by you off your answering machine in early October 1989?
Yes.
And playing this tape. You've listened to that tape, and on that tape, he's referring to some project where you're going to make big money. Do you know what he was referring to there?
Yes.
What was he referring to?
He was going to do Spanish-speaking mental health clinics for something to do with some kind of insurance and workman's comp.
And what was your role in that business scheme?
I didn't have any role in that. I had nothing to, no involvement.
Well, what was your understanding as to why he was calling you up and explaining to you that he had some scheme that was going to make big money?
He likes to tell everyone how, great he is at business, and he was just calling to brag.
And at the same time that he would call to brag, did he also, beginning in about October, start to call up and express a certain obsessiveness with what you were doing and possessiveness in regards to your romantic relationship with him?
Objection, compound calls for conclusion.
Sustained.
Did Dr. Oziel, around beginning in October or even before that, start making a lot of telephone calls to your house?
I would say it started before October.
And when did it start?
Probably mid-August is when it, mid-August, early September is when they became.
And he's testified here
redundant.
that those,
I'm sorry, yes.
He's testified here that those telephone calls that are reflected on his phone bills were made because you started putting pressure on him to call him back all the time. Is that true?
No.
And did you go through his phone bills and also your own phone bills to establish what pattern, if any, there was to the phone calls that were made by him versus the phone calls you were making to him?
Yes, I did.
And he has testified there were telephone calls, for instance, that took 268 minutes. Do you recall conversations of that length
There were times when he kept me on the phone all night.
And what was being talked about just in general during the times when he was calling you, keeping you on the phone all night?
He would just be badgering and haranguing and manipulating and trying to make me say something or do something that I was resisting. And he wouldn't give up. He would persist until I would say it or do it or agree. And if that took, 300 minutes or 500 minutes or however long it took for him to break me down, that's how long the conversation would last.
And break you down in what way? What was he trying to break you down
To do what he wanted.
to? Which was what?
It could be anything, from just to do whatever he wanted me to do.
And that occurred over a lengthy period of time, beginning in June, including right up to the point in time when you moved into his house.
Correct.
And would it also be true that on occasions he would call you up and disguise his voice as someone else
Yes.
and ask what you were doing and whether you've been out with other men?
Yes.
And showing you what's
Your Honor, Coach.
Yes.
Can I approach you with this again?
Yes.
This is showing you exhibit number 331. Do you recognize this as a list of the telephone calls that were made by Dr. Oziel to you in a period from June through November 7th, 1989?
Yes.
And did you create that document?
Yes.
And how was the document created?
My attorney obtained Dr. Oziel's phone records through discovery, and then we took Dr. Oziel's phone records and my phone records and listed them on the computer and created this document, which I think all of them except for the month of December is in the order that the calls came or were placed.
And when did the calls from Dr. Oziel to you begin?
These calls are only reflective of calls made from his home number, not his office number. Because his office number to my home or my business was a local call.
And
So-
when did the calls from his home to either your office or your home begin?
June 12th.
And how frequently were the calls made in that period from June to November? How frequent?
You mean the whole time period?
Just in general, if you could characterize it. Was he calling you once a day, once a week,
Oh, several times a day.
and all
Every
hours
day.
of the day and night?
All hours of the day and night.
And for hours at a time sometimes?
Yes.
And during the time when he was calling you, was he providing you therapy?
Sometimes.
Was he also talking to you about your relationship, your personal relationship?
Yes.
You said that you and your attorney were involved in preparation of that. Did you at some point end up suing Dr. Oziel?
Yes.
And did the pattern of calls end in November?
No.
Did they end in December when you moved into his home?
No.
And sometime around October, were you still involved with Dr. Oziel in a relationship?
Yes.
And on the weekend of October 30th, 1989, did you go out of state with Dr. Oziel?
Yes.
Did I approach you with this again, Jerome?
Yes.
Showing you what's been marked as 116, you recognize that as a boarding pass and a receipt for a place called West Court in Buttes in Tempe, Arizona.
Yes.
Is that dated October 30th, the boarding pass?
Actually, I can't see the date on here, but that was the weekend.
Skating for over 45 years has taken a toll on my body. I take Cunol turmeric because it helps with healthy joints and inflammation support. Why Cunol? It has superior absorption compared to regular turmeric. Cunol, the brand I trust.
What I won't have, Mark, just if you could compare the two, is that just a better copy of that same exhibit?
Yes, it's the same. It's just a darker copy.
And does it show the date of October 30th?
Where's the date supposed to be on here?
Why don't you show
I would
it, Jen?
stipulate that it shows the date of October 30th on the copy he's presented.
I see.
Oh, I see. It's stamped across there. I'm looking at the little type. It says October 30th.
Is that the weekend that you and Dr. Oziel went to Arizona?
Yes.
And before you went to Arizona, did you have some information that Dr. Oziel was going to meet with Eric Menendez on the 31st?
I've never been clear whether that phone call was just before we left or if it was the day that we returned.
And when you're referring to that phone call, would you tell us what you're talking about?
From my home, Oziel had picked up his messages from his wife Laurel and learned that Eric Menendez wanted to talk with him. And so from my house, he called Eric and spoke with him and set up an appointment.
And did he indicate to you what the nature of the meeting was going to be or anything at all about Eric Menendez?
Yes.
What did he indicate to you?
When he hung up the phone, he said that he hoped he wasn't going to hear what he thought he was going to hear. And when I asked him what he thought he was going to hear, he said that they killed their parents.
Right. Now, was it your understanding at that time when you had that conversation that Eric Menendez was a patient of Dr. Oziel's?
At that time?
Yes.
No.
Right. And you were a patient of his at that time?
Yes.
But was it unusual for Dr. Oziel to be talking to you about his other patients?
No.
And in fact, you have tape recorded conversations in which Dr. Oziel reveals the nature of clients' problems that have been seen, correct?
Objection, leading
Correct.
and irrelevant.
Objection to the form of the question is sustained. The answer is correct.
Did you tape record a telephone call from Dr. Oziel in which he discusses confidential problems of the patient faces?
Objection,
Yes.
irrelevant.
Overruled.
And showing you exhibit number 333, is this a tape cassette that you prepared that contains a conversation in which Dr. Oziel tells you about a woman doctor he's been treating and the nature of her sexual problems?
That's correct.
And is exhibit number 334 a cassette which you obtained from your answering machine, which reflects a conversation with Dr. Oziel, and again in October, in which he tells you about someone he refers to as a studio guy who is a patient of his?
Correct.
And was that uncommon for Dr. Oziel to be revealing the problems of his patients to you before October 31st, 1989?
No.
Would he actually name the patient by name?
Sometimes.
And other times, would he just refer to someone, for instance, on that tape as a doctor and indicate in general what the person's problems were?
He would give vital information that you couldn't mistake who the person is.
Now, going back to on or about October 30th, you had a conversation with Dr. Oziel about a planned meeting he had with Eric Menendez, correct?
I'm sorry, on what date?
On or about October 30th. either before, while
Correct.
you were in Arizona?
Correct.
And he indicated to you that he hoped it wasn't what he thought it was.
That's correct.
And that conversation was with you, it was not with his wife, correct?
No, that conversation was between Oziel and myself
And where were you when you had that conversation?
in my bedroom.
And do you think the date of that was on October 30th or some other date?
It was either on the 30th, the day that we returned from the airport, or it was just before, but I would say it was 30th when we had returned from Arizona.
And before, while you were in Arizona, did you and Dr. Oziel have an argument, without getting into the details of it, about whether your romantic relationship was going to continue?
I had broken off the relationship that Friday. And then,
The Friday before you went to Arizona?
yes,
And
that Friday and Saturday,
why were you going to Arizona with him if you had broken off the relationship?
because on Saturday when I hung up the phone and didn't want to talk with him or go to Arizona, then he raced to my store and did a big number on me, and somehow I ended up going to Arizona. And then in Arizona, we also had a confrontation about how the relationship needed to be different.
And again, without getting into the details, did you tell him that the relationship was going to end that
Yes.
weekend? You did. And so you had already told him that when he told you about this conversation with Eric Menendez?
Objection, Megan.
Had he already told you that had you already told him that the relationship was going to end when you had this conversation about Eric Menendez?
I had told him prior. I told him that the relationship was over prior to the discussion about Eric
And
Menendez.
how did he accept that news that the relationship was going to be over?
He didn't believe it or accept it, and he laughed a lot and just did his manipulations.
And when you say he did his manipulation, was he trying to keep you in the relationship or not?
He was trying to keep me in the relationship.
And how was he doing that?
Just by the things that he was saying. And then when this phone call came up and he asked me to go and be there for him, that this was like the one last thing I could do, and that if I did this, that it would show that all this work that he had put in on me wasn't for nothing, that if I did this, that it would show that I had learned something.
And when you say did this, what was he asking you to do in relation to the conversation he had with Eric Menendez?
He was asking me to come and be there in case something happened to him, so I could call the police or call an ambulance.
And did he give you instructions on what you were to do if
Yes,
he was
he
in
did.
a dangerous situation?
Yes, he did.
What did he say?
He had said that he was going to leave the doors to the other offices. There were 3 offices, and he was going to leave the doors to the other 2 offices unlocked so I could go in there to use the phone. And he just, told me to pay attention and listen carefully. And if I, heard anything that seemed like he was in danger, that I was to call the police.
And did he put you in fear as a result of telling you information
Most
about Eric?
definitely.
And did you, in fact, go to his office on October 31st?
Yes, I did.
What time did you arrive there?
a little after 5.
Now, Dr. Oziel testified he didn't recall you being there on the 31st, and he also said that after he had the session with Eric Menendez and Lyle Menendez, he drove to your house and told you about the sessions for the first time. Was that true testimony?
It's an outright lie.
And where had you gone to work that day on October 31st?
I went to work on October 31st.
And what time did you get out of work that day?
Oziel called me, I would say around 4:30 or 4:45, and he was with Eric at the time, and he told me that he was checking to make sure that I was going to be there, and insisted that I leave at that moment, which I did. And
did you take anything with you for your own protection?
I went to my house and I got a gun from my next door neighbor.
Who is your next door neighbor?
Robert.
I don't want his last name, but what did he do? How is it he had a gun?
I don't know why he has a gun, but he has a gun, and I borrowed it from him.
Was that a handgun?
I believe it's called a .357 Magnum.
And was it loaded? Did you take a loaded gun?
It was loaded, and he showed me how to shoot it.
Why did you take a loaded gun with you?
Because Oziel had made me very fearful.
And when you had a telephone conversation with him before you left work, did he indicate to you anything that Eric had said to him?
At that time, no.
And you were fearful because of something he had told you before that conversation?
Yes.
And was that fear as a result of your initial conversation with him when he said he had talked to Eric on the telephone to set up the appointment?
The fear was generated from the conversation we had after the phone call with Eric.
Now, when you got over to the office, what time do you think it was?
I would estimate about 5:15.
And what did you do when you got there?
I went into the waiting area, and there's these little buttons on the wall, and I pushed the Oziel button, and then I sat down and waited.
And what happened next?
Oziel came and stuck his head out the door and said that it was as he suspected. And
What did you take that to mean?
I took that to mean that they had killed their parents.
And after he said, "It's as I suspected," what happened next?
I believe he went back in to the office with Eric for a while.
And what did you do when he did that?
I just waited in the waiting room.
Could you hear anything from the waiting room? Any noises at all?
At that time,
Yes.
no.
And how long did you wait there before you did something else?
He came back out and told me that he was having Eric call his brother, that he didn't want Eric to tell Lyle that he had told him outside of his presence, that he wanted Lyle to be there when he found out, and that Lyle would be coming shortly, and that I wasn't to talk to him.
And did, in fact, Lyle come shortly thereafter?
Yes.
And were you still in the waiting room when Lyle arrived?
Yes.
Did you have any conversation with him?
Yes.
What was the conversation?
He came in and he pressed the Oziel button, and then he picked up a magazine and he started leafing through it. And then he asked me if I had been waiting long. And I made some stupid comment back, like, you know how doctors are or whatever, and that was it.
And then did he go into the inner office of Dr. Oziel?
Oziel came out and got him, and they went back into the inner office.
And did you remain in the waiting room or go somewhere else?
I went somewhere else.
Where did you go?
I went in the hallway to go into Laurel's office, and the door was locked. So I tried Munjak's office, and that door was locked.
And you were in the hallway at this point?
Yes.
And what did you do next?
I just sort of stood there a little perplexed and stunned because the doors were locked.
And could you hear anything in the office from the hallway at that point?
Yes.
What did you hear?
Lyle was very angry, and he was yelling at his brother that he was angry at him. And he was just upset with him and couldn't believe that he had done this or said this. And
Anything else that you heard?
not that I recall.
And how long did you stay in the hallway before you went somewhere else?
Just those few minutes. And then I went back to the waiting room.
And then what happened?
Time-wise, I'm not sure of the amount of time, but the next thing I knew, Eric ran past me, and he went down the stairway. And then Lyle came out, and then Oziel was following Lyle, and they went to the elevator.
Now, is the elevator on the same floor as Dr. Oziel's office?
Yes.
And could you see from the waiting room where the elevator was?
Yes.
And what did you see?
The two of them were standing in front of the elevator. Lyle was closest to the doors, and Oziel was behind him.
And did they have a conversation?
Yes.
What was the conversation you heard at that time?
Lyle said something about, well, I can understand, why, I can understand that he needed to or something. And then Oziel was saying, well, you really should stay and come back in my office, and you have to understand about confidentiality or something. And Lyle was just wanting to leave and go tend to his brother. And
You're gonna move to strike. Lyle wanted to tend to his brother's speculation of part of it.
well, he said, I just,
Portion of the answer is stricken.
Did Lyle Menendez say anything about what his intentions were in wanting to leave?
yes, he said he wanted to go take care of his brother.
And what did Oziel say?
And Oziel just wanted them to come back to the office. And the elevator was coming, and Lyle just said, you leave me, Oziel, and got in the elevator. And then Oziel jumped in the elevator after him.
The statement by Lyle, good luck, was before he got into the elevator, correct?
Yes.
And Dr. Oziel has testified that that conversation occurred downstairs near the Jeep. Is that true?
I wouldn't know. I wasn't downstairs
But you specifically heard Lyle Menendez say good luck to Dr. Oziel.
at the elevator.
Did Dr. Oziel say that Lyle needed him, or words to that effect?
Yes.
In what context did he say that?
Exactly, I'm not sure, but he was trying to convey to Lyle that not just Lyle, but both of them needed him.
Did Dr. Oziel say anything about being threatened, that he felt threatened? His perceptions were that he was threatened.
At the elevator,
Yes.
he said to Lyle, he said, "Are you threatening me? Is that a direct threat?"
And that was said in response to what? What did Lyle Menendez said?
Good luck.
And when you heard that, did it seem to you that Lyle Menendez said good luck in a threatening manner?
At the time that I heard it, I didn't think so. But then Dr. Oziel came back up and told me that it was, that I just didn't know what a threat was.
Right. But not based on what Dr. Oziel later told you, but based on your own observation of seeing that conversation, did it appear to you that Lyle Menendez was threatening Dr. Oziel?
Based on my own observation, I would say he was just trying to get away from him.
Was he being menacing in any way? In the way that he said good luck, or in anything else he did?
Not in my opinion, but later Dr. Oziel said that my opinion wasn't accurate.
And up to that point, had you heard Lyle or Eric Menendez threaten Dr. Oziel or anyone associated with him?
No.
Later on, did Dr. Oziel tell you that that supposedly is what he heard?
Later on, he told me that that's what was said.
Right, but you never heard that.
No.
And after Dr. Oziel, you said he got in the elevator with Lyle Menendez?
Yes.
And how long was he gone?
A few minutes.
And then what happened?
He came back up and he locked the door to the waiting room. Then he locked the door between the waiting room and the hall. Then we went into his office and he locked the door to his office.
And what happened then?
Then he said that they had killed their parents and that they had threatened him and everyone connected to him, and that it wasn't safe, and that he needed to, have Laurel get out of the house and get the kids out of the house. And then he started making phone calls.
And did he say that you were in danger?
Yes.
Did he say why you were in danger?
Just because I was there and because I was connected to him.
And were you afraid as a result of what he told you?
Yes.
Did you think at that point that you needed Dr. Oziel in any way because of the danger that he was making you feel?
Yes.
That he could maybe help you out of the danger you felt?
I felt he was my only chance.
And that was as a result of information that he gave you, correct?
Correct.
At a point in time when your relationship was not going so well?
Correct.
And were your hands, in fact, shaking during that time when you were in the office with Dr. Oziel by himself?
Yes.
Did you have a conversation about the fact that your hands were shaking and his weren't?
Yes.
What was the conversation?
He pointed out that my hands were cold and shaking, and then he said that when your hands are cold, that indicates stress. And then he made a big deal about how his hands weren't, and he held his hands out and he said, feel my hands, feel how warm my hands are, and see, no one else, no other man could handle this well, and am I bothered, am I worried? And he was just like, oh, he's the big protector.
And later on, in fact, in March, when you had a tape recorded interview with him at the request of the Beverly Hills Police Department, you said to him, I don't think you're afraid of the boys, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
And he said to you on tape, I don't think I'm afraid of anybody, or words to that effect.
That sounds accurate.
And did he seem to you like he was afraid when you were with him on October 31st after he had been with the Menendez brothers?
No.
Were you afraid though?
Yes.
Now, did he in fact start to call people on the telephone at that point?
Yes, he did.
And who did he call, at least from what you could hear on your end of the conversation?
The first call he made was to his wife, Laurel.
And who else did he call?
Then the other people, I don't know their names, but he told me that they were people connected with the, like an ethical board of psychology or something.
And while he was on the telephone, were you attempting to communicate him by writing something on a notepad
Yes.
and showing you what's been marked as Exhibit 335? Do you recognize that document? It's a one-page Xerox copy which says, "I'll pick it up. Does the public lot lock at a certain time?" ? And then there's some writing at the bottom. You see that?
Yes.
Is that your handwriting?
Some of it's my handwriting.
Which is your handwriting?
The written words from here up. The "I'll pick it up" to the "we" SH.
So your words are, "I'll pick it up," and then, "Does the public lot lock at a certain time?" ?
Correct.
And why did you write down, "I'll pick it up"?
The first call he made was to Laurel, where he told her that he was going to be moving into my house and that she was to pack a bag for him and that he wanted her to go to a hotel and to tell the children that they had a gas leak in the kitchen and they were going to stay in a hotel until it was fixed, and that he was going to be staying near his office. And so then he kept saying that either he would pick up the suitcase
He would go to his house and pick up the suitcase?
or I would pick up the suitcase, or we would both come and pick up the suitcase. And when he said that, I saw it as an opportunity to get out of there, so I wrote, "I'll pick it up."
And did you, in fact, later that night go over to the house and pick up the suitcase?
He wouldn't let me out of his sight. The two of us went together to pick it up.
To his house you went on October 31st?
Correct.
He testified that the reason he had to come to your house was because he was fearful of going to his own house because the Menendez brothers might be there. And are you testifying that he, in fact, drove with you to his house to pick up a suitcase?
Correct.
He also testified that he was looking in his rearview mirror on his drive to your house to see if the Menendez brothers were following him. Was that true testimony?
Objection, argumentative.
Did you see Dr. Oziel looking in his rearview mirror on the way to his house to pick up his suitcase?
No.
Did you pull right up in his driveway and go into the house?
We pulled up into the driveway and the suitcase was on the front porch.
Was Mrs. Oziel already gone?
She was already gone.
And what happened then? Did you go inside the house?
Not on that day.
You picked up the suitcase and left?
We picked up the suitcase and left.
And what is the other handwriting on that note that you wrote?
You mean, what does the public lot lock at a certain time mean?
Why did you write that down?
Because I looked at the clock and it was around 10 o'clock, and it started to occur to me that I had parked my car in the public lot next to his office, and I wanted to move my car if that was the case. And so he was on the phone. I couldn't verbally ask him, so I wrote it down. And indeed, the lot had locked at 10 o'clock and my car was there until the next day.
At the bottom of this note, there is a phone number, 907-0150, and then Jim and Judy. Do you know who wrote that then?
Oziel.
And do you know what that was, why that was written down?
Those are the people that Laurel and the children went to stay with that night.
So he's actually writing this down as he's talking to his wife on the phone.
Correct.
And on the side, there are three telephone numbers, 2310495E, 2310594L, and then 2850052M. Do you know who wrote that down and what it refers to?
Oziel wrote those numbers down, and they're the phone numbers for Eric and Lyle and the main house number
And do you know where he obtained those phone numbers from?
from Laurel.
How is it that you ended up with that note? Did you take the original of that note that's in front of you there?
He brought the original home because he wanted those phone numbers.
And how is it that you came into possession of it?
It just stayed around the house, and somehow I still had it.
Now, when he was making these telephone calls, were you sitting on the desk trying to soothe him in some way?
Some of the time,
What were you doing?
rubbing the back of his neck and shoulders.
And did he seem fearful at that time when you were doing that?
No, he talked and laughed with some of the people, but I thought that could just be a cover.
He was laughing with some of the people he was talking to on the telephone?
Yes.
And how long was he making these phone calls before you and Dr. Oziel went somewhere else?
Quite a long time.
And who else did he call besides his wife and the other person that you referred to?
The people he represented to me that were the ethical medical board people. He also called a police station.
And had a conversation with someone at the police station?
Yes.
And after he had the telephone conversations, did you leave with him?
Yes.
And where did you go?
He called downstairs and had the guard or a night watchman come up and escort us to his car because my car was locked in the garage. And I mean, it would have been better if we had taken my car because I had a phone in my car and he didn't. And so it would have been best if we could take my car, but my car was locked up. So we went to his car.
And did he explain to you why he had to come in and move in with you?
Because they couldn't be in their own house.
Did you talk about the fact that at least prior to this happening, you were going to end your relationship and now he was going to get a suitcase to move in? Was that discussed at all?
That night?
Yes.
No.
After you went to his house to get the suitcase, did you in fact go to your own home and spend the night?
Yes, and there's a witness to the fact that we came into my house together and that he had a suitcase because I had a roommate living with me at the time.
Who was that?
Suzanne?
And he stayed that night, correct?
Correct.
And then the next morning, did he get up and go to work?
The next morning, he did go into the office. We went together because I had to collect my car.
Because it was still in the lot?
It was still in the public lot.
And that would have been November 1st?
November 1st, correct.
On November 2nd, did you have occasion to be back in Dr. Oziel's office for another session where Lyle and Eric were present?
Yes.
And before that session took place, were you with Dr. Oziel on November 1st?
Yes.
Did he spend the night with you that night as well?
Yes.
Did he seem fearful during this period of time?
He was very, he was presenting to me that he was very upset because he claimed that they left the office and that they had not arranged another appointment with him. And he kept saying to me that if he could just see them one more time, he could get control of them.
Control in what way?
Just control of them.
Did he fill in any of the details to you as to who the Menendez brothers were and how much money they were worth or anything along those lines?
Okay, objection, Vegas declined.
Before the November 2nd session?
When it first appeared in the newspapers that Kitty and Jose Menendez were dead, then he told me that the Menendezes were his best friends.
The Menendez parents were his best friends?
Yes, that they were his best friends, and that the reason why he was going to calling the boys and going to the memorial service and all these things was because Jose was his best friend, and if this had happened to him, that Jose would do this for his daughters.
And did he mention anything about money or about how much the estate was worth or how much the boys were worth or anything along those lines?
Yes,
When did he first mention that topic?
shortly after the parents had the memorial service.
And what did he say about that?
He said that they were worth $14 million and that these boys were going to inherit $14 million and that they were going to need his guidance and his assistance to invest the money properly and to find the right accountants and the right lawyers.
Did he indicate how he was going to be of assistance other than providing lawyers? Did he have any specific business proposals in mind that he discussed with you?
He said that if we needed any money to start anything, that he could persuade them to put up the money.
If you and Dr. Oziel needed any money to start any of your joint business ventures, he would persuade them to put up the money?
Correct.
And other than that, did he indicate anything specific about how he was going to help them out in that regard?
To invest this money and to have, find people to handle it for them.
Did he seem excited by that prospect?
Time frame again.
Yes. Prior to November 2nd, you had this conversation?
This is before October 31st or in that time?
Let me establish a foundation. Conversation about money initially came up around the time of the death of the parents in August of '89.
Yes.
And were the discussions about money concentrated around that time period, that is August 20th on or about?
The conversations were concentrated around the time period of the memorial service.
And did he continue to have conversations with you about this in October when Eric came in for this session on the 31st?
It came up again at that time.
All right. Now, before you went to Dr. Oziel's office on the 2nd, you said you saw him you stayed overnight, the next day got up, went to his office. And did you see him again that night? Did he come back to your house and spend the night with you?
Correct.
Was that unusual for him to be spending the night in your relationship up to that point? Had he freely spent the night with you on occasion?
No.
And
He spent, the only time he really spent the night is if he felt he was losing control of me or if he suspected I was seeing someone else.
Objection with respect to speculation on part of the witness.
Sustain the interest rate. Let me just inquire briefly of you, Mr. Bird, how much longer will your examination be?
I think I'm going to be a while, Your Honor. This would be a good place to break if the court would like to do that.
All right, we'll take a recess until Monday at 9 o'clock. I'll ask the both juries to return, both juries rather.